So, good morning, everyone. When did you arrive in Geneva?
Saturday.
Saturday, so you didn't have a chance to go to the Human Rights Council? No. It was really interesting. Where are you coming from, actually?
United Arab Emirates.
Okay, and is it your first time in Geneva?
Yes. First time.
Okay, so welcome.
Thank you.
What I suggest is I will tell me a few words about who I am and what I do, and then explain a bit my perspective about the role of the media in the human rights field, and then we'll have an exchange, okay?
Okay.
So, basically, I've been a journalist for 20 years. I work for different daily newspapers, and also work on radio and TV. I've been covering, at the time it was called the Commission of Human Rights, the UN, and then Human Rights Council. And also I've been covering different war zones and conflicts. I spent a lot of time in former Yugoslavia during the time of the war, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in Kosovo, in Croatia, in Serbia. I spent also a lot of time in different places in Africa, especially in Rwanda, but also in Somalia and in the Middle East, obviously, and in many other places. So, what I would like to tell you in a nutshell is very simple. Information matters. It matters a lot. Why? Because information shapes reality. Because it's like in a play. It's distributing roles, victims and perpetrators, good guys and bad guys. And sometimes the stories should be much more nuanced than it is portrayed in different media. But it's a very difficult job. So first, information matters because it is connected to personal freedom. If you don't have freedom of information, then it's very difficult to make informed choices. And in countries in crisis, your life could be in danger if you don't have the right information to stay or not to stay, which area is dangerous or not dangerous, who is perpetrating war crimes. So it will affect your life and the persons next to you. Then what is also difficult is journalists are operating in a very difficult environment because everyone perfectly understands that journalists are shaping the realities. So they want to influence the journalists. And so there is a lot of methods to influence journalists. You have obviously different actors. You have governments, you have lobbyists, you have pressure groups, and all of them will try to shape reality and to influence journalists. And so it's becoming a real challenge for journalists to do a real serious job because truth or reality doesn't exist as such. Every time it's a reconstruction process. And you are working in real time. So the question is, how best can you reflect reality when you are in the pressure of time in a competitive environment, right? So it's becoming extremely complex when you have different voices trying to impact on you, to influence you, and to shape what you are going to say in the way they want you to portray it. So it's becoming a real challenge with very sometimes dire consequences. You know also that media can be used for political reasons. Maybe you heard about what happened during the genocide in Rwanda. There was one media, Radio-Télévision de Mille Collines, which was instrumental in basically perpetrating the genocide, in asking the population to commit the genocide. So you have hate media, you have hate radios, which is one dimension. You have also media which are doing just the opposite. They are so-called the pro-peace media. And I give you an example. There is one organization based actually in Switzerland, in Lausanne, called Fondation Hirondelle. And after the genocide in Rwanda, they understood that the media played a key role, a dramatic role, a tragic role in Rwanda. So it was necessary to create a new media which will give free and fair information. So they created a radio station called Radio Hirondelle, Radio Agatashia in Kenya, Rwanda, which was giving free and fair information, helping the people to free their minds of the propaganda and to get access to quality information, which will allow the people to make the right choice, to continue living in Eastern Zaire, to go back to Rwanda. What are the dangers? How do you make the best choices regarding your own life and the life of your family? Then there is also well, now I would like just to speak a bit what happened the last few days in Geneva, which is connected to the Human Rights Council, and to see how the media played a key role. If you ask me what have been the three more important UN resolutions adopted last week, I will say that one of them is the one to establish a commission of investigation in Sri Lanka. You may know that in Sri Lanka there was a terrible civil war, that the army was able to win the war militarily, that during the last few months between 30 and 40,000 people, mostly civilians, including children, were killed by the army. And the resolution to open, well, there have been, for the last few years, a number of attempts to create a resolution to open a commission of investigation. But every time, the government was able to block it. So what happened this time? Why was it different this time? And the answer is pretty simple. There has been a film by Channel 4 called The Killing Fields, which was also shown in Geneva, and it was about what happened in Sri Lanka, and it was with graphic images of the killing of civilian population. And confronted to that reality, a lot of countries couldn't vote anymore to protect Sri Lanka, and the resolution was adopted. So basically you see here that the media was also transforming the political reality in a room where diplomats were meeting 10 minutes away from here. Second example, North Korea. You know that North Korea is a state with a terrible situation, with oppression, with total absence of freedom, where people are basically sometimes starving. You know that there is some humanitarian aid, but which is not monitored because it's impossible. But for years and years, for more than a decade, all the discussion was centered about nuclear discussion about North Korea. And what is happening now? There have been a commission of investigation, a special rapporteur which has worked on North Korea, and the conversation has shifted not to the nuclear issue, which is a very real one, but to the human rights issue, which is also a very real one, but before which was not highlighted. So now the discussion has shifted, and why? Because there was this commission of investigation, but also because the media picked up that story and it became the big story of one of the big stories of the Human Rights Council session of last week. Third example, the drones. You know that for a number of years, the American administration has used drones in Pakistan, in Yemen, in Afghanistan particularly. And this question has been highly documented by a number of websites, media throughout the world, which allows today to create such a situation where Pakistan came with a project of resolution and was able to convince a majority of countries to vote in favor. So you see here again that there was a combination about the role of a country which tabled a project of resolution, the role of the NGOs which also highlighted this resolution, and the role of the media which documented very thoroughly how many people have been killed in each incident where drones were being used. So you see in these three examples that the media played every time a key role in changing the perception of the people, of the diplomats, of the NGOs also, and the close interactions between NGOs, human rights NGOs, and the media. So I mentioned briefly what happened with. I mentioned briefly earlier what happened with manipulation of the media. It might happen. We all know that there was no chemical weapons in Iraq, but the Bush administration was able to trick a certain number of media in order to trigger the intervention at the time against Iraq, making a connection with also the 9/11, which was not proper. What's happening also regarding journalists is they are confronted to very different narratives. So today you have every state wants to objectively to project its own narrative. And here you have conflicts very often of narratives. And the journalists have to understand and to pick up the best argument, not only the best arguments, but the best facts in understanding what the reality is about. Let me take a simple example, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You will have two different views in the council. You will have what Imad and other diplomats will say with great eloquence about the illegal occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. He will obviously, these diplomats will point out how international law has been violated by the State of Israel. How Israel is again violating IHL by expanding the settlements, by annexing East Jerusalem or Golan Heights, by diverting raw materials and water, etc., etc. Then you will have the Israeli representative who will come and try to project his own narrative, which is obviously quite different. And the narrative will be why Israel is singled out as a country which is violating human rights, as so many countries are violating human rights. I guess it might point out that Tibet has been occupied by China for decades and there hasn't been any resolution condemning China, or that Indonesia for decades has occupied East Timor without being condemned once by the UN, or Western Sahara, which is occupied by Morocco. So he will try to point out from his perspective the selectivity and the politicization of the Human Rights Council. And I guess he will also explain that there is a so-called automatic majority, that the OEC, the Organization of Islamic Conference, the Arab League, the non-aligned movement will vote as groups to condemn Israel. I guess on the other side, also Imad and other diplomats might also point out that in the Security Council, Israel is always protected by the American veto. So what my point is that journalists will be fed by information by every side, and their work will be quite difficult to do the best job to portray and to report precisely what has been said without being instrumentalized by any side. And I don't know, do you have any questions? Feel free to interrupt me anytime, okay? And now I would like to give you a simple example of what happened to me in a very real situation, and which really prompted me to ask, what is truth? And how difficult truth is to establish. What happened? I can tell you exactly. It was, I believe, a Sunday, January 16, 1999. I was in Kosovo. I was working for a newspaper, a French newspaper, and I was actually accompanying a group of OSCE observers. At the time, the situation was extremely tense between Serbs, which were still in Kosovo, and the UČK, which was fighting the Serbs. And suddenly, the observers received a call saying that a massacre has happened in a small village at 1 hour drive from the capital, Pristina. And as I was with the observers, we went right away. And it was quite dramatic. There were a lot of people obviously getting killed at short range with a bullet here in the forehead, and some. I won't go into the details, but it was quite graphic to see that. And in the same time, it was quite late already in the day, and I had to write my article. And what happened? In a few minutes, we had almost 4 propaganda machines trying to fill me with information to explain who was responsible of a massacre. So you have the UČK, the KLA, the Kosovo Liberation Army, which was explaining that there were a lot of victims, obviously, and it was the massacre was perpetrated by the Serbs, and that a number of children were also killed, and so on and so on. So that was one source of information. A second source of information was just the opposite. Was the Serbs, and the Serbs was basically saying, try to think to whom it profits this massacre. It profits to the Kosovo people because they want to trigger a NATO intervention. So if they want to trigger a NATO intervention, the best thing to do is to act as agent provocateur, is to kill some of their own people. Like that, there will be a NATO intervention, and then they will succeed in liberating themselves from Belgrade. So they're basically saying it's the Kosovo people who called the KLA who killed their own people in order to trigger foreign intervention. And then you have the Americans and the French who have different take. The Americans actually at the time wanted to intervene militarily, which is quite right. And the French were more for a diplomatic solution, and they wanted. Were not many journalists at the time in this massacre. So the way we are going to portray the narrative will have a direct influence on the political and military situation, and it will somehow decide if there will be a NATO intervention against Serbia. So the stakes were extremely high, and it was extremely difficult to get rid of all the propaganda and just to stick to the facts and to be sure of what happened that day at that hours. So just to tell you that now we are now 15 years later, and among the few journalists who were there at the time, we still have different views, and I think all of us have tried to be extremely honest about what we have seen, what they understood, by having talked to the same people. So the reporting could be extremely difficult when a lot of people are also trying to manipulate you and you are operating in a very competitive environment and working in real time. I would like you to show also how media and NGOs can change reality. I just give you a number of examples now with the Human Rights Council and now in Kosovo and how difficult it is. Now I would like, have you heard about Hissène Habré? Does it ring a bell or not? No. Hissène Habré used to be the dictator in Chad. And so he was, for many years, a very good friend of the Americans and the French. Why? Because he was opposing Gaddafi. Chad is just below Gaddafi, below Libya. And Hissène Habré so committed a number of war crimes and also killed a lot of his own people. He was eventually overthrown by his commander-in-chief, who is still in power, Idriss Déby. And for years and years, some people who have been detained and managed to survive in the prisons of Hissène Habré tried to indict him. And it was because Hissène Habré flew to Dakar, Senegal, and he flew with actually the assets of Chad's national bank. So he was quite rich and was able to bribe a lot of people in Senegal to stay there. But the point is that if you find the right information, then you can trigger a chain of events which eventually will bring Hissène Habré to a trial and to be sentenced. So when we went to Chad, there was one man who was the president of the Victims Association. And I don't know why, but for some reasons I didn't like him at all. It was just a gut feeling. I mean, I didn't like this man. There is something. And later I understood that he used to be on the side of Hissène Habré before becoming himself a victim of Hissène Habré. So the other victims also didn't like him so much, and I could feel it even if I didn't have the time all the explanations. But he wanted very much to be in the film. And as I didn't want him, I asked him something totally impossible. I say, I want to go to the headquarters of the political police of Hissène Habré. And I was sure I won't see him again, because I told him, it's very important, you know, you have been tortured there, and I want to film you there. And it was just an alibi, because I know it was impossible to go there, because no one had access for years and years to this house. And the next day, he's coming in the morning with the paper of the President of the Republic, Idriss Déby. And he said, you know, Pierre, I got the authorization. What I didn't know that he's the cousin of Idriss Déby. And Idriss Déby maybe didn't realize, or for some reasons, he accepted. And suddenly I found myself, I asked Reed, do you have anything to do? He said, no, so come with me. So we went there, and again, we're sure that we won't find anything, but it was still interesting to go. It was interesting for me, for the film, also for the footage, to show that place which incarnates really the repression under Hissène Habré. And suddenly we discovered that. And said, it's crazy. The situation is crazy. And we were very much afraid that these documents, which we understood immediately were essential to build a judicial case, might disappear or might be destroyed very quickly. Just by chance, I had on my schedule a meeting with the Prime Minister of Chad just after that. And so I went there and I show him, and I was filming him, and I say, "Can we have access to these documents?" And I wanted him to say yes in front of a camera in order for him not then to disjudge himself, say, "No, I didn't say it, never said it." And very quickly, Human Rights Watch organized to make copies of these documents and to ship them as fast as possible from Chad in order to avoid the destruction. So it was quite a hectic time for all of us. And what is also interesting, if we go earlier on time, you see exactly the role of each actor. So it's almost like a salad. In the first, we have some people who survived the jails of Hissène-Habré. Not many people, but they were able to survive. And a few of them decided to do something totally silly. They decided, and maybe we can, I will try to find it on the film. They decided to organize, to make information about each detainee with his picture and what happened to him. And think, it's Chad in the early 1990s. Everything is made by hand. It's dangerous. The old guys who organized repression are still there. So we are collecting information which is highly dangerous for their own sake and for their own family. But they still do it. And we were able to collect 700 testimonies at the time, which is unbelievable. And eventually, one Chadian who was a lawyer was contacted and went to the States. And she was able to contact Human Rights Watch and say, well, we have these testimonies, with 700 testimonies. And the people in Human Rights Watch couldn't believe it. It's not possible. So they say, we need to see by ourselves. So they sent someone, and it was a junior person. And then this junior person said, well, that's true. Then Brody decided to go there. And so we went also together. And it was at the time of the film when we discovered all these, more of these documents. And then that triggered the whole judicial process. And the judicial process, as Desmond Tutu has said, was like a never-ending soap opera. Why? Because in the beginning, have you heard about the principle of universal jurisdiction?
Yeah.
Yes? Are you lawyers? No?
It was explained to us yesterday by a judge.
Okay, good. So basically, universal jurisdiction, in very simple terms, is to be able to prosecute someone for crimes he has committed somewhere else, right? So first, Human Rights Watch and the former detainees went to Senegal, where Hissène-Habré is living. And they went to the court and asked to use the principle of universal jurisdiction to prosecute Hissène-Habré. And in the first instance, the court said yes. And then Hissène-Habré's lawyers went to the Supreme Court of Senegal, which say we cannot do that because we are not competent. We don't have jurisdiction over that case, which was not true, but it was highly political, and Hissène-Habré and the former president of Chad were very, very close, and they had a lot of deals together. And they have the same lawyer, and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. So to make it short, it was impossible to follow at that stage the road to justice through Senegal. So what happened next? So the Association of Victims and Human Rights Watch decided to go to Belgium. And so Belgium decided to open the case. And you know, at the time, Belgium has the most extensive law of universal jurisdiction in the world. So there was a judge which built a case, was able to collect all the information, collect even more testimonies, and use our documents. But the president of Senegal refused to extradite Hissène Habré to Belgium. So really, for years and years, he blocked everything. Then there was, so as Belgium was really fed up, it went to the International Court of Justice in The Hague. And the International Court of Justice made a ruling which condemned Senegal for not extraditing or judging Hissène Habré. So in that condition, after that, Senegal decided to open to open discussions with the African Union to decide what to do with Hissène Habré. And there were even bilateral negotiations between the EU, European Union, and the African Union. But at the end of the day, the president of Senegal lost the election. There has been a new president since a couple of years, and like that, it has been decided that Hissène Habré will be tried in Senegal. So the whole story has taken more than 10 years, the whole attempt to bring that man to a trial. But it is succeeding now, and it is the first time that there is a court in Africa who will judge according to hybrid law a former head of state. There have been the case with Charles Taylor, which was put on trial by the Court of Sierra Leone, Special Court of Sierra Leone, but he was judged in The Hague. So it's the first time that it is happening in Africa, and we can see how things are moving. So what is really interesting, you have, if you think about all the actors involved, you had first, in the beginning, you have an association of victims which doesn't have any real means to work. They don't have a lawyer, they don't have any office where they work underground. Then you have an American powerful NGO which will put a lot of effort to create the case. Then you have the role of the media, which is instrumental in finding these documents, and also in a lot of people will see this footage, which also change radically the perception of the people about what Hissène Habré has done in the past. Then you have different courts in Senegal, the judge in Belgium, the International Court of Justice, the EU, the African Union, and the change of government. So it has taken all that to bring one man to a dock. So you see how difficult it is. But it's doable, but it's a lot of effort. So I wanted to make you aware of how difficult it is to make a real job in journalism, to make and also how difficult it is sometimes to have some impact. But at the end of the day, you do have some impact. So now I'm open for discussion, debates, questions, anything. And then you have always what is very, media also has to take decisions. Media don't have an unlimited space. When you work in a newspaper, you have 20 pages or 40 pages, and you have 3, 4, 5 pages at the most on international news. So what are you going to cover? Are you going to cover North Korea? Are you going to cover the Democratic Republic of Congo or the Republic of Central Africa? How are you going to make your choice? And that matters a lot, because some situation won't exist for the public, and some other situations will exist. So you will create reality, and you will also create black spots. And that decision is a huge decision. I give you a simple example. Today, the Republic of Central Africa is in a situation of pre-genocide. It's not me who is telling you that. It's Adama Dieng, who is the advisor to prevent genocide at the United Nations, and is advising Ban Ki-moon. So we have a situation today, almost like in early April in Rwanda 20 years ago, where suddenly we are close to a genocide happening. So the question is, what should the media do? They will report or not report, to which extent they are going to report. The fact is that here we care much more about Syria or about what's happening in Ukraine than in Republic Centrafricaine, right? So here again, the political, or not political, but the editorial decision to cover or not to cover will have huge implications. Because if you cover, what's happening? Then the people started to understand that's a terrible situation. That's unacceptable. So if it is unacceptable, what's happening? There is pressure on governments. Do something. And then the governments say, well, I can do something, but are my national interests involved? Yes or no? Difficult. Republic Centrafricaine, not so much. But in the same time, if the people say, it's just so unacceptable, we cannot, we have to learn from the past. We have to learn from what happened during World War II, during what happened with Rwanda, with former Yugoslavia, with Srebrenica, and we say never again. So we need to do something. So at one point, the government say maybe we need to send troops on the ground. But to send troops on the ground, what does it mean? That a number of soldiers might be killed. Are you ready, if you live in Europe or somewhere else, to send your soldiers to be killed for Republic Centrafricaine? It's a very difficult political decision, because you know that if in the beginning the public opinion will say in your country, that's great, you need to do it. After 3 months, when they will see the body bags coming back, a lot of people will say, hey, wait, is it necessary to die for Bangui? Do we want really that?
And is the country going to benefit us in future or not? Because basically some of these, yes, as humans we should stand with these countries, but at the same time, for people around the world to think about the countries that are suffering, we couldn't say, oh, we'll go help them, but then in return, what they're gonna give us? But
yes, it's a decision. In the same time, you have decisions actually taken by the United Nations. Have you heard about the R2P, the responsibility to protect? States have have decided at the General Assembly to adopt a resolution calling the right to protect, meaning that if there is a situation almost as dramatic as what happened in Rwanda 20 years ago, there need to be an intervention. But in the same time, you know very well that there is the concept of sovereignty, national sovereignty. So you cannot do everything. You have limits. But in the same time, if a population is in danger to be exterminated, you need to do something. Right. But then comes the question, when are you intervening? And that's a very difficult question. And here again, the media plays a huge role in making the connection about covering or not covering a situation. When Al Jazeera decided in 2011 to cover for 70 days and nights, Tahrir Square, what was the impact? Did you think it affected the situation on the ground?
It fueled the situation.
What?
It fueled the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So, exactly that. By covering a situation, we are not only covering the situation, we are changing the situation. We are transforming the situation. You are creating a new reality of the situation. So you will have Tahrir Square, and you will have another Tahrir Square maybe in Republic Centrafricaine, where no one will know about it. So that's an editorial decision, which is extremely important.
I have a last question, sir.
Yes.
Do you think that freedom of press is an issue, and it should be like reviewed or edited, or like some of, let's say it's a TV show or something, a political talk show. It's talking about some issues in some countries that have conflict. And do you think it should be reviewed? Like some stuff should be cut, some stuff should be not said on air or mentioned?
Well,
The
you have
freedom of speech, I mean.
yes, no, I fully understand. It's a big question which has to be unpacked. First of all, we have different traditions. Well, everyone agrees that, no, not everyone, but most of the media agree that there are things you don't show on TV, or if you show it, you explain to the public that it's graphic scenes, and in order to prevent young children to see. I mean, we can think about horrendous acts committed in many places on Earth, Syria or whatever. Okay, so that's dimension just for the protection of youth, but it's just one point, one small part of the answer. Then the question is, how do we regulate press freedom and press of information? And in America, it's very different than in Europe. In America, there is the First Amendment. And the First Amendment says that basically you can say everything you want. It's a constitutional right to say everything. And that your liberty is based on the right to information. But in the same time, there should be some limits. Well, there are some limits. And how does it work? When in America there is a direct accusation or direct threat, direct and immediate threat to someone, then it is forbidden. You can say in America, which will be forbidden in Europe, that all the people with blue eyes will be killed. In America, that's fine. You can say in America, the Holocaust never happened. That's fine in America. In Europe, it has different history, and the perspective is a bit different. In Europe, there is more limitations. And for instance, incitement to hatred will be condemned in Europe, and freedom of press or freedom of information will be much more severe than in America. So in Europe, to take just a simple and stupid example I just mentioned about people with blue eyes will be killed, that's not acceptable according to most of the European laws. Then there has been a huge discussion, and I'm sure that you have been very much aware about the whole question of defamation of religion. Have you heard about that? I can imagine, no? Defamation of religion.
Yeah.
So what is it?
It's like when you give out opinions that harm what people think about the religion.
Yeah, exactly. And
Can you say the word again, sorry?
defamation of religion. Defamation. Defamation. I don't know how you say it in Arabic. And there has been a very vivid debate for 10 years about that question at the UN. Should religions to be protected or not? That was the discussion for a very long time, and it was a very heated discussion because a lot of people, especially in the Western world, were saying it's part of freedom of expression. And other people, especially in the Muslim world, say it's not acceptable because it is insult to religions. And the conversation has evolved, and eventually there has been, and my understanding is that there has been a compromise. And the compromise, as far as I understand it, is religions don't have rights, meaning that they cannot, no one can talk in the name of a religion. But this being said, you cannot, but incitement to hatred or incitement to hatred, ethnic or religious, is prohibited. So there is a compromise which has been accepted on a global at the UN about that. So you see that you can have very different perspectives, and we know exactly you may remember what happened with Salman Rushdie and his book The Satanic Verses. We know what happened also with caricatures of a prophet. We know what happened also in France and in other places. So it has been really a very heated discussion about the limits of the press freedom. And so there has been a compromise today. I'm not sure that it will satisfy everyone, but at least there is a diplomatic solution. Yes.
Like you said before, journalists influence the reality, and what they think reflects the situation. So when you watch news, it's always someone else's opinion, because as humans we're always biased. So how do you think?
Yes. What is, I think, if you start from the starting point that information is key to your personal freedom, you need to work almost like an historian of a current time. And how does work an historian? An historian is confronting different sources, right? So I will do the same. And every morning with my iPhone, I have 4 or 5 media. I'm looking at it just to understand how they portray the news. I'm not just to give me a flavor of how they construct the realities, how they hierarchize, how they prioritize the news. And that will help me to better understand then how information will be framed. And so it's very important in my perspective, when people will get access to many sources of information, which will allows them to compare them and then to decide according to their own priorities what I decided today to believe or to what is important for me according to the news which has been provided from a variety of sources. Otherwise, we are prisoner in only one by only one vision, and it's never good. We are all selective. I mean, no one can see 360 degrees. The question is to be aware of that. And if you are aware of that, then it's already a lot. And I mean, I gave you my example. Really, I tried for 15 years to be extremely honest with that massacre and to really to construct to the best of my ability what happened that day. And honestly, I'm not sure. I've written a lot of articles about that. And I think today I'm right. If you ask me to swear it, I can't. But I really talked to the people. I talked to a lot of witnesses. And some of the witnesses didn't have the same perception. So it's difficult. And so we have to accept that the concept of objectivity doesn't exist as such. Because to be objective would be in a kind of meta position you are from the moon and look and have a global view of what's happening on Earth. In fact, no one can be in that position. So we have to understand our limitations. But because you understand your limitations, you also understand that you cannot be a total relativist. Things happen. People are getting killed. Someone killed them. So you can construct facts. And you know that you have to be extremely careful the way you are reconstructing realities. And then, you know the organization UNICEF. UNICEF pick up that story and say, wow, we should do something about these kids. And the kids and UNICEF intervened, created a place, special place to take care of these kids. And after an agreement with the government, these kids were released and put under the supervision of UNICEF to be re-educated. And a year later, I went back to Rwanda. And because I've written this story, which changed the life of so many young people, I was invited to go there. So I went there and asked the kids, okay, what's your name and what do you want to do later in your life? And a young kid told me, well, I would like to be a doctor. And you, I would like to be a psychiatrist. And you, I would like to be a journalist. And I was a bit puzzled. And then I went to a village next to it. And in this village, next to the village where kids accused of genocide were there, the people who survived the genocide, including kids. And asked the kids, what do you do? Nothing. Do you have school? Barely. What do you want to do later? Oh, I don't know, maybe I will be like my dad, a peasant. What happened in reality is that well-intended actions can create very strange situations. Because suddenly these kids who are in terrible situation in the middle of genocide were taken away to be in a protected environment according to the rules of the Northern Hemisphere. They were granted a lot of rights. And the people who survived the genocide and who were living next to them didn't have these rights. So you see that my article has totally unintended consequences. So you don't control information also. I'm thinking about another example. I was writing about a bookstore in Geneva who was propagating hatred. And I went to the bookstore and saw the books, I saw the hate propaganda, and I've written an article about it. What I didn't imagine is that someone or some people decided to take stones and will destroy the bookstore. And it's not at all what I intended. So that's true that you give information, but sometimes you create a situation which you don't control. And I guess you have to accept it. Information is like something it's very hard to control. A lot of people think they can control information. Actually, it's very difficult because you don't know what's going in the mind of the people, and they might act in a way you don't imagine. I would like to ask you, you asked me many questions. Let me ask you a few questions. What do you receive your news from every day or?
BBC.
Twitter?
Gulf News.
Hmm?
Gulf News.
Gulf News?
No, it's Today, BBC.
BBC?
News. Union, but in Arabic.
In Arabic and BBC in English.
Okay.
International. So I see both sides, both news.
Okay.
I follow many websites on Twitter so I can see because interesting to see how each agency says the news in a different way.
Okay.
Broadcasting, internet.
Internet.
Twitter, you feel it's more personal. Sometimes it's coming from the people there themselves.
Okay.
So you get to,
Not accountability.
yeah.
Okay. And so you're
Local
so
TVs, like for instance, in Egypt,
yes.
there's some local TVs like مصرية,
Okay.
المحور, and so on. There's a lot of
Okay.
local TVs.
Okay.
Or national TV.
Okay. So basically, you are receiving most of your news through internet and Twitter or Facebook or social media, and also from TV and mostly satellite channels. Okay. Al Arabiya and Al Jazeera. Okay.
Also BBC.
And BBC. But
There is Sky Al Arabiya.
okay.
Sky.
Okay.
It is now less than 1 year. Yeah.
Okay. And so how do you operate yourself? What is true for you? What matters? How do you make your own combination? And what is even more terrible, or as terrible, is a lot of women got contaminated by HIV, by AIDS. And I was really shocked to discover that the perpetrators who were in jail in Arusha got access to health, because it's a rule actually. Right to health exists for all detainees. But what's happening for the women who are the victims is they don't have right to health. So at the same time, the women who were victims, the family were killed. They have been raped and multiple rapes many times. They were dying of AIDS, and the perpetrators actually had the right to health. And again, if you put it in perspective, and you can understand, the rationale behind it, but at the end of the day, it's utterly shocking. And so it's one thing I try to expose in a different TV documentary I've done. And I think when you expose such facts, I think you help also to transform the realities and to help maybe sometimes better decisions to be taken, and at least some women can get easier access to health and to medicine than it used to be before that.
Aware people, it's like an awareness for people.
Yes, exactly. It could be a wake-up call, but by itself, it has to have some impact, and then the people have to pick up the stories, and there has to be some awareness. And if you reach that level of awareness and pressure, then political decision will follow. But it takes a lot of effort to reach that stage. But when you succeeded, it's at least you know why you got up in the morning. Yeah, I think so. What time is it? You have a few minutes left. Thank you.